Professor Thrix adjusted the audio equipment with her long, blade-like fingers. Her compound eyes reflected the holographic displays that surrounded the lecture hall like a rainbow of terror. Students from 12 different worlds sat in specially, designed seats that accommodated their various body types. The Avari perched on high branches that extended from the walls. The crystalline Siltech rested on heated platforms that kept their mineral bodies at optimal temperature. The small, furry Veloth huddled together in groups, their large ears twitching nervously. Today we begin our study of apex predator recognition, Professor Thrix announced, her voice carrying the clicking undertones of her native language. This knowledge has kept our species alive for millions of years. What you will hear today represents the most dangerous sounds in our galaxy. Tom stretched in his human-sized chair, the only one of its kind in the classroom. He had been the first human to enroll in Harmony Station's xenobiology program, and after 6 months, he still felt like a curiosity rather than a student. His classmates whispered about him in languages he was still learning, and professors often paused mid-lecture to explain concepts that seemed obvious to everyone except him. We will start with Category 5 predators, Professor Thrix continued. These are creatures that have wiped out entire colonies. When you hear these sounds in the wild, your only option is immediate evacuation. She pressed a control, and the first recording began to play. The sound filled the massive chamber like liquid fear. It started as a low rumble that seemed to come from everywhere at once, then rose into a shriek that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Around Tom, his classmates reacted instantly. The Avari's feathers stood on end and several took flight, circling near the ceiling in panic. The Veloth pressed themselves flat against their seats, ears folded back. Even the usually calm Siltech began emitting distress harmonics that sounded like breaking glass. Tom listened with interest. The sound was definitely aggressive, probably territorial. It reminded him of something, but he could not quite place it. He noticed how his classmates were breathing faster, their pupils dilated, some actually backing toward the exits. This recording comes from the dead world of Zerion Prime, Professor Thrix explained, her own voice slightly strained. The predator responsible drove off all colonists within 3 standard months. No one who heard this sound in person lived to describe the creature that made it. The next recording was different. Higher pitched, more rhythmic. It had an almost musical quality that rose and fell like a twisted song. This time, several students actually left the classroom. A pale blue. Kethani near the front began making rapid clicking sounds that Tom had learned meant extreme distress. The singing death of Vega 7, Professor Thrix said. This creature uses its voice to disorient prey before striking. The sound alone can cause permanent psychological damage in most species. Tom found himself nodding. The pattern was familiar, like whale songs he had heard in documentaries, but with a predatory edge. He wondered what the creature looked like. Probably something that hunted in groups given the complex vocalization. The third recording made him sit up straighter. This one he definitely recognized. The deep, rumbling snarl that built to a sharp, echoing scream. The way it ended abruptly, then repeated. He had heard this exact sound before, many times. Around him, the reaction was the strongest yet. The remaining Veloth students fled entirely. One of the Avari fell from its perch, caught by a classmate just before hitting the floor. The Silthech's distress harmonics became so intense that Professor Thrix had to adjust the acoustic dampeners. And this, she said, her voice barely steady, is the most terrifying sound in the known galaxy. It comes from Keth Prime, from a creature we call the Drachmor. This beast stands 4 meters tall, possesses claws that can cut through titanium, and has reflexes faster than most ships' computers. No weapon has ever penetrated its hide. No trap has ever held it. It has never been captured. Alive. She paused the recording, and the chamber fell silent except for the worried breathing of traumatized students. In 300 years of galactic exploration, we have never found a more dangerous— "That's just a cougar," Tom said. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ventilation systems seemed to quiet down. Professor Thrix's compound eyes focused on him with the intensity of targeting lasers. "I beg your pardon?" she asked. "A cougar," Tom repeated. "Mountain lion, puma. We've got lots of names for them. That's definitely a mating call, probably a female calling for a mate. Pretty standard for big cats." Several students who had been edging toward the door stopped moving entirely. Professor Thrix's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign Tom had learned, indicated either deep thought or complete confusion. "You are suggesting," she said slowly, "that the most feared predator in our galaxy is similar to a creature from your home world?" "Not similar," Tom said. "I mean, I can't see it, so maybe it looks different. But that call is almost identical to the mountain lions back home in Colorado. Had one outside my bedroom window for about 3 weeks when I was 12. Mom wouldn't let me sleep in the living room, said I needed to get used to the sound. Kept me awake until mating season ended." The classroom had become so quiet that Tom could hear his own heartbeat. Professor Thrix moved closer, her tall frame casting a shadow over his desk. "Are you telling me," she said, "that you, as a juvenile, listened to sounds identical to the Drakmor's call, for weeks, from your sleeping chamber, and your parent considered this normal?" "Well, yeah. I mean, they don't usually attack humans unless they're cornered or protecting cubs. Uncle Rob got jumped by one when he was hiking, but that was because he surprised a mother with babies. Got some pretty good scars, but he said the trick is to make yourself look big and back away slowly. Never run from a cat." Tom realized that everyone was staring at him. Not just looking, but staring with the kind of intense focus usually reserved for dangerous animals or natural disasters. "How many of these creatures exist on your world?" Professor Thrix asked. "Cougars? I don't know exactly. Thousands, probably. Maybe tens of thousands. They're all over North and South America. Pretty common, really." "And humans coexist with thousands of creatures identical to the Drakmor?" "Sure. I mean, you have to be careful when you're camping or hiking in their territory, but it's not like they're everywhere. Most people never see one in the wild. They're actually pretty shy." Professor Thrix stood motionless for so long that Tom wondered if she had somehow broken. Finally, she turned to address the few students who remained. "Class is dismissed," she said. "Tom, please remain behind. I have questions." As his classmates filed out, still casting nervous glances in his direction, Tom wondered what he had said. Wrong. It was just a cougar call. Back home, park rangers played recordings like that to teach people what to listen for while hiking. He was starting to realize that Earth might be a more unusual place than he had thought. The holographic display flickered to life above Professor Thrix's desk, showing detailed schematics and biological readings. Tom watched as three-dimensional models of various creatures rotated slowly in the blue light, each one accompanied by scrolling text in several alien languages. The professor's office smelled like ozone and something that reminded him of pine needles, though he doubted any of the plants decorating the walls were from Earth. "Tell me about your Uncle Rob," Professor Thrix said without looking up from her. "Data screens?" Tom shifted in the oversized chair that had been adjusted to accommodate his human proportions. "What do you want to know?" "He's my mom's brother. Works as a park ranger in Yellowstone. Been doing it for like 20 years. And he survived an encounter with a creature equivalent to the Drakmor?" "Well, like I said, it was a cougar. Female. With cubs. He was doing a trail survey and came around a bend too fast. Startled her. She knocked him down and clawed up his shoulder and back pretty good before he managed to scare her off." Professor Thrix finally turned to face him, her compound eyes reflecting the holographic light in fractal patterns. "How did he scare off? An apex predator?" He grabbed a big stick and started yelling and waving his arms, made himself look bigger. Cougars don't really want to fight something their own size unless they have to. Takes too much energy and they might get hurt. The professor's mandibles clicked rapidly. She manipulated the holographic controls, and the display changed to show a creature that made Tom's breath catch. It was definitely cat-like, but massive and wrong in ways that made his eyes water to look at. 4 meters tall as advertised, with 6 legs instead of 4, and claws that gleamed like metal. Its face was a nightmare version of a cougar's, with too many teeth and eyes that seemed to track his movement, even though it was just a recording. "This is the Drakmor," Professor Thrix said. "It has depopulated 17 research stations. Its claws can slice through ship hulls. It can leap 50 meters horizontally. Its roar alone has been known to stop the hearts of smaller species through pure terror." Tom studied the creature carefully. "Okay, that's definitely not a cougar. But look at the muscle structure in the hind legs and the way it holds its head. Still a big cat, just more of one. The extra limbs probably make it incredibly fast. I bet it's still an ambush predator, though. Probably waits in cover and then springs on its prey." "You are not afraid of this creature?" Tom considered the question seriously. "I mean, I wouldn't want to run into one unarmed. But it's just a predator, right? It follows predictable patterns. It has motivations I can understand. It wants food, territory, maybe mates. If I knew more about its behavior, I could probably avoid it pretty easily." Professor Thrix brought up another display, this one showing attack reports and casualty figures. The numbers were staggering. Hundreds of deaths, entire facilities abandoned, ships destroyed. "These are the results of encounters with Drakmor and similar apex predators," she said. "How do you explain these casualties if such creatures are, as you say, predictable?" Tom read through the reports, frowning. "Well, for one thing, it looks like most of these people just ran. That's the worst thing you can do with any big cat. Running triggers their chase instinct. And look here. This facility was built right, next to what's obviously a water source. That's prime hunting territory. It's like they put a research station in the middle of Times Square and then wondered why there were so many people around. You believe these casualties were the result of poor planning?" "Poor understanding," Tom corrected. "Look, back home, we have bear attacks every year, but most of them happen to people who don't know what they're doing. They leave food out. They surprise bears in the woods. They try to take selfies with cubs. People who know bear behavior rarely have problems." Professor Thrix was quiet for a long moment, her fingers dancing across the holographic controls. New creatures appeared in the display, each one more terrifying than the last. Massive snake-like beings with crystalline scales. Wolf creatures, the size of shuttlecraft, something that looked like a cross between a spider and a shark. "Your world has predators equivalent to all of these?" she asked. "Not equivalent, but comparable. I mean, we've got grizzly bears that can weigh 800 pounds and run faster than human vehicles. Great white sharks that can breach completely out of the water to catch prey. Saltwater crocodiles that can hold their breath for an hour. And have bite forces strong enough to crush car engines." "And humans coexist with these creatures?" "We coexist with worse," Tom said. "Have you ever heard of an African elephant in musth? Or a bull moose during rutting season? Those will kill you just for being in the wrong place at the wrong time, and they're not even predators." Professor Thrix leaned back in her chair, which adjusted automatically to support her unusual anatomy. "I have studied predator-prey relationships for over 300 standard years. In all that time, across dozens of worlds and hundreds of species, I have never encountered anything like what you describe." "What do you mean?" "Most sentient species evolved intelligence specifically to avoid predation. We developed technology, weapons, and social structures designed to keep us safe from the creatures that hunted us. But you are describing a species that evolved alongside its predators." Tom thought about that. "I guess that's true. Humans have always been hunters too. We just weren't as fast or strong as other predators, so we had to be smarter. Your species. Hunts? Well, not most of us anymore, but yeah, for most of human history we were persistent predators. We'd wound an animal and then track it for days or weeks until it collapsed from exhaustion or blood loss. We didn't need to be faster or stronger. We just needed to be more stubborn. The professor's eyes widened, all of them. You are telling me that humans are predators? Technically, yeah. Omnivores, but we definitely evolved to hunt. Our forward-facing eyes, our endurance, our ability to throw objects accurately, our social hunting behaviors, all predator adaptations. Professor Thrix stood up abruptly and began pacing around her office, her long legs carrying her in quick, agitated strides. "This explains everything," she muttered. The lack of fear response, the analytical approach to threat assessment, the casual dismissal of apex predators as manageable problems. Is that weird? She stopped pacing and looked at him with something that might have been awe. "Tom, do you understand what you have just told me? You have described a species that not only coexists with apex predators, but has evolved to think like them. Your people do not fear the Drakmor because your brains process it the same way you would process a competitor, not a threat. I mean, it's still a threat. I wouldn't want to fight one. But you believe you could understand one, predict its behavior, perhaps even avoid or deter it through knowledge rather than technology." "Probably, yeah. I mean, I'd want to study it first, learn its patterns, figure out what it wants and what it's afraid of. But sure." Professor Thrix sat down heavily, her chair groaning under her weight. "I need to make some calls," she said. "Dr. Kozlov needs to hear about this, and the xenobiology department, and probably the psychology faculty." Did I do something wrong? Wrong? Professor Thrix looked at him with what he was learning to recognize as her version of a smile. "My dear human, you have just revolutionized our understanding of sapient evolution. You have not done something wrong. You have done something impossible." Tom scratched his head, still confused. "It's just animal behavior. Pretty basic stuff." "Really?" "Yes," Professor Thrix said quietly. "I am beginning to realize that what humans consider basic might be the most extraordinary thing in the galaxy." Dr. Lena Kozlov arrived at Professor Thrix's office carrying 2 cups of coffee and wearing an expression that Tom had learned to associate with intense curiosity. As one of only 3 humans aboard Harmony Station, she had become something of a mentor to him, though he suspected that relationship was about to become more complicated. "So," she said, settling into a chair that had been specially requisitioned for human use, "Thrix tells me you've been terrorizing her students with your casual attitude toward galactic apex predators." Tom accepted the coffee gratefully. "I just," said the recording sounded like a cougar. "Was that really so scary?" Dr. Kozlov looked at Professor Thrix, who was arranging holographic displays around her desk like a shrine to nightmare creatures. "Show him the comparison data." The display shifted to show 2 audio waveforms side by side. They were almost identical, with only minor variations in pitch and duration. Below the waveforms, scrolling text provided analysis in multiple languages. "The left recording is from your Earth Cougar," Professor Thrix explained. "The right is from the Drakmor. The mathematical correlation is 94%. They are, for all practical purposes, the same vocalization." Tom studied the data, sipping his coffee. "Makes sense. Similar ecological niche, similar communication needs. Convergent evolution happens all the time." "All the time?" Dr. Kozlov raised an eyebrow. "Tom, do you understand how extraordinary this is? This creature has been the subject of study for 50 years. We've sent expeditions, lost ships, abandoned entire planets, and you identified it from a single audio recording because it reminded you of something that lived outside your bedroom window. Well, when you put it that way, it does sound kind of weird." Professor Thrix activated another display, this one showing biological data and evolutionary trees. "Dr. Kozlov, please explain to Tom what makes human evolution so unusual." Dr. Kozlov set down her coffee and leaned forward. Most sapient species in the galaxy evolved along what we call the intelligence escape pattern. As their predators became more dangerous, they became smarter, developing tools and social structures specifically to avoid being eaten. They became better at hiding, better at running, better at detecting threats from a distance. That makes sense, Tom said. Humans did the opposite, Professor Thrix interjected. Instead of becoming better prey, you became better predators. Your intelligence evolved not to escape the food chain, but to dominate it. Dr. Kozlov nodded. Think about human evolutionary adaptations, forward-facing eyes for depth perception and tracking prey, opposable thumbs for tool manipulation and weapon crafting, advanced spatial reasoning for pursuit hunting, social cooperation specifically designed for group hunting strategies. Most species, Professor Thrix added, developed technology to build walls between themselves and danger. Humans developed technology to make themselves more dangerous. Tom thought about this while staring at the holographic predators rotating around the office. I guess that's true. Our first tools were weapons, spears, clubs, throwing sticks. Even our domestic animals were mostly chosen for hunting or protection. Exactly, Dr. Kozlov said, and that's why your brain responds to predator threats differently than other species. When a Veloth hears a predator call, their neural pathways light up with fear and flight responses going back millions of years. When you hear the same call, your brain analyzes it for useful information. Professor Thrix manipulated the display to show neural scan data. These are brain imaging results from yesterday's class. Notice the limbic system activation in non-human students when exposed to predator vocalizations, fear, stress, preparation, for flight. The display shifted to show a different pattern. This is your neural response to the same stimuli. Almost no limbic activation. Instead, we see increased activity in the prefrontal cortex and temporal lobes, analysis, categorization, pattern recognition. You were literally studying the sounds that were sending your classmates into panic attacks, Dr. Kozlov said with a hint of amazement. Tom felt a little embarrassed. I didn't realize they were that scared. I mean, it was just a recording. To them, it was not just anything, Professor Thrix said. To most galactic species, predator vocalizations trigger immediate survival responses. Their ancestors who did not react with appropriate fear did not survive to reproduce. But human ancestors who could analyze and understand predator behavior had advantages in both hunting and survival, Dr. Kozlov added. Your fear response is calibrated completely differently. Professor Thrix brought up another display showing Earth's ecosystem. Your planet is remarkable in another way. Most worlds that produce sapient life have relatively few apex predators. Earth has dozens: bears, great cats, sharks, crocodilians, wolves, venomous snakes, birds of prey, marine predators. And humans learn to coexist with all of them, Dr. Kozlov said. Not by avoiding them, but by understanding them well enough to share territory. Tom looked at images of Earth's predators floating in the holographic display. They did look pretty impressive when presented like this, especially to someone who had never seen them before. I never really thought about it. They're just part of the environment. You learn what to do around them, like learning traffic safety or weather patterns. Traffic safety, Professor Thrix repeated slowly. You compare coexistence with apex predators to traffic safety. Well, yeah. Cars kill way more people than bears do. You learn the rules, you pay attention, usually you're fine. Dr. Kozlov laughed, but it was not entirely a happy sound. Tom, yesterday you listened to a recording that has given nightmares to career xenobiologists, and you compared it to rush hour traffic. Is that bad? Not bad, Professor Thrix said. Unprecedented. In 3 centuries of galactic civilization, we have never encountered a sapient species with your particular relationship to predation. Dr. Kozlov stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the stars beyond Harmony Station. It explains so much about human behavior that puzzled other species. Your exploration patterns, your risk assessment, your approach to unknown environments. How? So, most species explore cautiously, always assuming the worst possible threat level until proven otherwise, Professor Thrix explained. Humans explore aggressively, assuming manageable risk until confronted with evidence to the contrary. When other species encounter a new world, their first question is, "What might kill us here?" Dr. Kozlov said. When humans encounter a new world, their first question is, "What lives here, and how do we coexist with it?" Tom considered this. I mean, both questions seem important. They are, Professor Thrix agreed. But the order in which you ask them reveals fundamentally different approaches to survival. Dr. Kozlov returned to her chair. There's something else we need to discuss. Your casual mention of Uncle Rob surviving a predator attack has implications you might not have considered. What kind of implications? Most galactic species have no surviving records of individuals who encountered apex predators and lived, Professor Thrix said. Such encounters are universally fatal. The idea of someone not only surviving but returning to the same environment afterward is impossible, Dr. Kozlov finished. By galactic standards, your uncle should be dead, traumatized, or at minimum, permanently relocated to a safer environment. Instead, he continued working as a park ranger in territory he shared with the creature that attacked him. He said the experience made him a better ranger, gave him insight into Cougar behavior patterns. The two scientists looked at each other with expressions Tom was learning to recognize as the precursor to intense academic excitement. Of course it did, Dr. Kozlov said softly. A human would learn from a predator encounter rather than being traumatized by it. This changes everything, Professor Thrix said, her mandibles clicking rapidly. We need to document this, study it, understand the full implications. Tom finished his coffee, still trying to process the idea that his species was apparently unique in the galaxy. So what happens now? Now, Dr. Kozlov said with a grin that reminded him uncomfortably of his uncle's expression when he found fresh animal tracks. We find out just how far this rabbit hole goes. The holographic chamber hummed with energy as Tom stepped inside, sensors immediately beginning their calibration scans. The space was larger than he had expected, easily the size of a gymnasium, with projectors and sensory equipment built into every surface. Dr. Kozlov stood at the control console outside the transparent walls, making final adjustments while Professor Thrix reviewed safety protocols on a separate display. Remember, Dr. Kozlov called through the intercom. This is purely observational. We want to monitor your physiological and psychological responses to various predator encounters. If you feel uncomfortable at any point, just say so, and we'll shut it down. Tom nodded, though he was more curious than nervous. Through the observation windows, he could see other faculty members gathering to watch. Word had apparently spread through the xenobiology department about the human who was not afraid of apex predators. He recognized Professor Vell, the crystalline Siltech, who taught comparative evolution, and Dr. Kint, whose species Tom could never remember the name of, but who always smelled like cinnamon. We'll start with creatures from your own world, Professor, Thrix announced. Baseline responses to familiar threats. The chamber flickered, and suddenly Tom was standing in what looked like a North American forest. The detail was incredible, down to the sound of wind through pine needles and the smell of damp earth. He could even feel a slight chill in the air. A brown bear materialized about 20 meters away, sniffing at something on the ground. It was a big one, probably male, with the thick build and darker coloring of a grizzly. Tom watched it with interest, noting the way it moved and tested. The air, "That's a nice specimen," he commented. "Probably weighs about 600 pounds. Male, definitely, based on the size and behavior. He's foraging, not hunting. so he's probably not aggressive unless startled. Through the speakers, he could hear Professor Thrix dictating notes about his calm demeanor and analytical response. The bear looked up at him, seemed to decide he was not worth worrying about, and continued its search for food. The scene shifted, and Tom found himself standing on a rocky outcrop overlooking what appeared to be the African savanna. Below him, a pride of lions rested in the shade of an acacia tree. Several cubs played nearby while the adults dozed in the heat. "Beautiful animals," Tom said. "Look at the muscle definition on that male. And the way the females are positioned, they've got excellent coverage of all approaches to their territory." The observation continued through a parade of Earth's predators. Great white sharks in crystal blue water, tigers stalking through jungle, undergrowth, wolves working as a coordinated pack. In each case, Tom provided a running commentary that sounded more like a nature documentary than someone facing mortal danger. "Interesting," he said, when a massive saltwater crocodile was projected into a swampy environment around him. "This one's probably female based on the size. They get bigger than males. See how she's positioned near that log? Perfect ambush spot. If I were swimming here, I'd want to stay in the middle of the channel and make a lot of noise so she knew I was coming." Dr. Kozlov's voice came through the intercom with barely contained excitement. "Tom, your heart rate hasn't elevated above normal resting levels. Your stress hormones are completely stable. Are you sure you understand these are simulations of creatures that could kill you?" "Sure. But they're just doing what they evolved to do. The crocodile there, she's not evil or malicious. She's just a very efficient predator in her natural environment. If I respect that and behave appropriately, there's no reason for conflict." The next phase introduced alien predators, and Tom felt his interest spike. The first creature to appear made him take a step back, not from fear but from surprise. It looked like someone had crossed a tiger with a spider, resulting in something. With 8 legs, retractable claws, and far too many eyes. "Now that's fascinating," Tom said, circling the motionless projection to get a better look. 8-limbed locomotion would make it incredibly fast and maneuverable. Those extra eyes suggest it hunts in 3 dimensions, probably in forest canopies or cave systems. The claw structure indicates it's built for grappling rather than slashing, so it probably immobilizes prey before killing. Professor Thrix's voice carried a note of disbelief. "That creature is responsible for the abandonment of 6 colonies. Its hunting method is considered so terrifying that exposure to recordings of its kills can cause permanent psychological damage." "I can see why," Tom admitted. "It's definitely an efficient killer. But look at the energy cost of maintaining 8 limbs that size. It probably hunts infrequently, which means it has to be very selective about targets. Too much effort to waste on something that's not worth the calories." They continued escalating the threat level. Tom watched a creature that looked like a living shadow flow across the simulated landscape with movements that hurt to follow with his eyes. He observed something that resembled a cross between an octopus and a tornado, its tentacles moving in, patterns that seemed to bend reality around them. "Okay, that one's definitely not from anywhere near Earth," he said about a creature that appeared to be made of liquid metal and malevolent intent. "But you can see it's still following predatory logic. It's testing my reactions, trying to determine if I'm threat, prey, or something to ignore." The grand finale was a creature Professor Thrix introduced as the Nightmare of Altair Seventh. When it materialized, Tom understood why most species could not look directly at it. The thing seemed to exist in too many dimensions at once, with features that shifted and changed even as he watched. It was like looking at the concept of terror given physical form. Tom studied it for several long minutes, walking around the projection and examining it from different angles. His observers held their breath. "You know what this reminds me of?" he finally said. "There's this deep-sea creature on Earth called a barrel-eye fish. It's transparent and weird-looking, evolved to hunt in an environment so alien that it seems impossible. This thing probably evolved in an environment I can't even imagine, but it's still a predator with predator motivations. Dr. Kozlov's voice was barely above a whisper. Tom, that creature has driven trained xenobiologists to suicide just from viewing recordings. Military personnel have refused to enter systems where it's been sighted. You've been staring at it for 5 minutes and taking notes. It's definitely disturbing to look at, Tom agreed. My brain keeps trying to process visual information that doesn't make sense. But underneath all the weird stuff, it's still following predatory behavior patterns. See how it keeps positioning itself between me and the exits? Classic territorial display. The holographic chamber powered down, leaving Tom standing in an empty room surrounded by very quiet scientists. Through the observation windows, he could see Professor Vell's crystalline surface, flickering with colors he had never seen before, while Dr. Kint was making rapid notes with all 4 of his hands. Dr. Kozlov entered the chamber, followed by Professor Thrix. Both looked at him with expressions somewhere between awe and concern. Tom, Dr. Kozlov said carefully, do you understand what just happened here? You showed me a bunch of predators and I looked at them. You looked at creatures that represent the accumulated nightmares of a dozen worlds, Professor Thrix corrected. You analyzed them like you were watching educational videos. Well, they were educational. I learned a lot about alien evolution and environmental adaptation. Professor Thrix's mandibles clicked in what Tom had learned was her version of helpless laughter. Of course you did. Of course you did. Dr. Kozlov put a hand on his shoulder. Tom, I think we need to have a longer conversation about what it means to be human in a galaxy full of prey species. Are we really that different? Different? Professor Thrix looked around at her colleagues, all of whom were still staring at Tom like he was an exotic and potentially dangerous animal. My dear human, I am beginning to suspect that different is a massive understatement. 3 weeks after the holographic chamber tests, Tom had become something of a celebrity aboard Harmony Station. Students from other departments attended his xenobiology lectures, not to learn about alien life forms, but to watch the human who discussed apex predators the way others might talk about household pets. His casual observations had already led to breakthroughs in predator behavior research and risk assessment protocols. Tom sat in the station's main observatory, working on an essay about convergent evolution in predatory species, when Dr. Kozlov found him. She carried 2 cups of coffee and a data pad filled with what looked like official documents. Mind if I sit? She asked, settling into the chair across from him. I have some news that might interest you. Good news or weird news? Tom had learned to ask this question after several conversations that had started normally and ended with him discovering another way humans were apparently unique in the galaxy. Both, I think. The Galactic Council has officially established a new field of study based on your observations. They're calling it Apex Prey Dynamics, and they want to set up research centers on 12 different worlds to study predator-prey, relationships using human methodologies. Tom looked up from his essay. Human methodologies? Your approach to analyzing predator behavior, the way you assess threat levels, predict behavioral patterns, identify ecological niches, what you consider basic animal observation. The rest of the galaxy considers revolutionary science. Dr. Kozlov activated her data pad, showing him official documents stamped with the seal of the Galactic Council. Professor Thrix has been appointed to head the new department. She specifically requested that you be offered a position as a research consultant. I'm still an undergraduate student. Not anymore. The council voted to award you an honorary doctorate in comparative xenobiology, along with a special citation for unprecedented contributions to galactic predator understanding. Apparently, your identification of the Drakmor vocalization patterns has already led to successful peaceful contact protocols on 3 worlds. Tom set down his coffee, feeling overwhelmed. I just said it sounded like a cougar, and that observation has probably saved hundreds of lives. Dr. Kozlov leaned back in her chair, smiling. But there's something else. Something that came up during the council hearings that I think you should know about. What kind of something? Dr. Kozlov's expression became more serious. During your interview sessions with Professor Thrix, you mentioned something that we've been analyzing. You said that where you grew up, the thing that scared people wasn't bears or mountain lions, but moose. Yeah, so? Tom, do you understand why that statement has kept xenopsychologists awake for 3 weeks? He thought about it. Because moose are herbivores? Because you described being more afraid of unpredictable herbivores than predictable predators. Every other sapient species in the galaxy has the opposite fear response. We're instinctively terrified of predators and relatively comfortable with herbivores, even large ones. Dr. Kozlov brought up a holographic display showing brain scan comparisons. We've been testing this with volunteers from other species. Show a Veloth images of a massive herbivore and a small predator, and they'll focus all their attention on the predator. Show the same images to a human, and they assess threat levels based on predictability and behavior patterns, not dietary preferences. That makes sense, though. A bull elephant in must is way more dangerous than a sleeping tiger. Exactly. But that's a completely alien way of thinking to the rest of us. Most species evolved to categorize threats as predator or not predator. Humans evolved to categorize threats as predictable or unpredictable. Tom considered this while watching a transport ship dock with the station through the observatory windows. So what does that mean? It means humans are the only known species that fears chaos more than death. Every other sapient race fears being eaten. Humans fear not understanding what they're dealing with. Dr. Kozlov stood and walked to the window, looking out at the stars. There's more. The Council commissioned a study of human exploration and colonization patterns. Do you know what they found? I'm almost afraid to ask. Human colonies have the highest success rate in hostile environments, the lowest casualty rates from predator encounters, and the fastest adaptation times to alien ecosystems. But they also have the highest rates of colonist psychological stress when dealing with unpredictable weather patterns, geological instability, or other environmental chaos. Humans can handle monsters, but not hurricanes. Humans can understand and adapt to monsters. Hurricanes don't follow behavioral patterns you can analyze and predict. Tom laughed, though it came out slightly strangled. We really are weird, aren't we? Wonderfully, impossibly weird. Dr. Kozlov returned to her seat. And that brings me to the final piece of news. The Council has approved funding for a comprehensive study of Earth's ecosystem and human evolution. They want to understand how a single world produced both unprecedented predator diversity and the galaxy's only apex prey species. Apex prey species? That's what they're calling humans now. The species that evolved to be prey animals but became predators instead, then. Developed intelligence not to escape the food chain, but to understand and manipulate it. Tom felt a strange mix of pride and bewilderment. So what happens now? Now you get to choose. You can continue your studies here, help establish the new research programs, maybe even lead expeditions to study predator-human interactions on other worlds. Or you can go home to Earth and live a normal life, knowing that you've changed how an entire galaxy thinks about predation and survival. Tom was quiet for a long moment, watching ships move between the stars like distant fireflies. Can I ask you something? Of course. When you first heard about what happened in Professor Thrix's class, were you surprised? Dr. Kozlov considered the question carefully. Honestly? No. I was surprised that it took this long for someone to notice. I've been living among alien species for 5 years, and I've always wondered why they seem so terrified of things that struck me as manageable problems. So other humans would have reacted the same way? Probably. That's what makes this whole thing both amazing and a little sad. Sad? Dr. Kozlov gestured toward the observation deck where several alien students were pointing excitedly at something outside the station. Look at them. They're fascinated by a simple cargo transfer because it involves ships moving in patterns they can predict and understand. For most species, the universe is a terrifying place full of things that want to eat them. She turned back to Tom. But humans look at the same universe and see problems to be solved, patterns to be understood, ecosystems to be explored and appreciated. You don't just survive in a dangerous galaxy, Tom. You find it interesting. Tom picked up his datapad and saved his essay. The irony was not lost on him that he had been writing about convergent evolution while discovering that humans had apparently evolved in a completely different direction from everyone else. "I think I'd like to stay," he said finally. "Help with the research. Maybe learn more about why we're so different." "I hoped you'd say that." Dr. Kozlov grinned. "Professor Thrix has already designed a curriculum around human-predator interaction. Studies. She's calling it Applied Earthling Logic." Applied Earthling Logic? Her words, not mine. Apparently, the ability to remain calm while analyzing something that wants to kill you is now considered an advanced academic discipline. Tom laughed. A real laugh this time. "My mom's going to love this. She always said I'd find a way to make a career out of the weird animal noises that kept me awake at night." As they gathered their things to leave the observatory, Tom caught sight of his reflection in the window. He looked the same as always, just a human student with messy hair and coffee-stained clothes. But now he knew that somewhere in his genetics and neural pathways was something that made him fundamentally different from most of the galaxy. He was a member of the only species that had looked at a universe full of monsters and decided to understand them rather than hide from them. And somehow, that had made all the difference. Walking back through the corridors of Harmony Station, Tom passed groups of alien students who nodded respectfully when they saw him. Some still seemed nervous in his presence, but others approached, with questions about Earth animals or predator behavior. He was becoming not just a curiosity, but a resource, a bridge between the galaxy's prey species perspective and humanity's unique predator partnership worldview. The last thing he heard as they reached the elevator was a young Avari student explaining to her friend that the human Tom had said her homeworld's terrible sky hunters were probably just following standard raptor territorial behaviors and could likely be deterred with proper understanding of their nesting cycles. "Just like the human said," the student chirped excitedly. "They're not evil. They're just very good at being what they are." Tom smiled as the elevator doors closed. Maybe being the galaxy's only apex prey species was not such a bad thing after all.